From the Fathead Studio in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny.
Man, am I still pretty? And he's like, you ain't pretty, but you're going to be all right.
And now I'm just hanging on, looking at the wall, like flying this way. And I'm like, oh man, I got to let go of this thing at some point.
And then there's one that could literally pick you up.
Yeah.
It's
I'm not really sure about that, but yeah.
That's called a helicopter.
Well,
And the last lap was just chaos. I mean, like 4 wide, 5 wide.
It's like whatever, if you land it and send it into the fence, you're probably not gonna get hurt. Bounce, and then this insane roll, the car that Keegan was in. I mean, I don't know, it's the shape of the Beetle or what, but that thing sent it.
So I was the supercharger specialist on my old man's car with
Specialist?
Yeah, it sounds cooler than crew guy.
Hi, I'm Tony Stewart.
I'm Mario Andretti.
I'm Christy Lee.
I'm Alexander Rossi.
I'm Cruz Pedregon.
Hey, I'm Antron Brown, and this is The Skinny.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Skinny. We're bringing you all the action live from the MAVTV booth here at the Performance Racing Industry Show, better known as PRI. I'm Ken Stout. That guy right there is Mr. Rico Elmore. He is the brains behind this show. Put it all together, typically in Speedway, Indiana. We're about 20 minutes away from there. We are now downtown here at the PRI show. Typically, Michael Young would be running the controls, but my good friend, Mr. Stephen Grind, first ever camera guy, by the way, going back to, I don't even know when, late 90s maybe, early 2000s, late 90s, I think it was.
Did he make you look any better then?
He's back, no, he's, as you can see, he's consistently made me look worse.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But he's back there cutting the show. Our good friend Greg Hunter is also running audio with us. He takes care of a lot of the stuff in the studio, voiceovers that we do. Arlen, another guy, he's a camera guy here today that I've been working with since the early 2000s, going back to short course off-road. And Bill, I just met today. He's also on camera. So a big staff here at PRI. Certainly glad to be part of everything that's going on here. And of course, our home at MAVTV. The guy sitting right alongside is president of Formula Drift, Ryan Sage. Welcome to the show, man. Glad you had time to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff. Speaking of MAVTV, you guys have a home here as well.
We do. Yeah, we do. And it looks like we're going to continue to go down that road. It's been a tremendous experience. Linear was never really something that we thought would be possible with drifting.
Really?
But, it took a Maverick style type of company
Nice play.
to really give our format an opportunity. And, we just finished the year, and I think overall it was a tremendous success.
Yeah, so as we talk about Formula Drift here, obviously this guy's been involved, co-founder, by the way, with Formula Drift, Jim Lau. Did I say it right?
You got it. Yeah, you're in the ballpark.
Pretty close there.
Ballpark, I like that.
But big ballpark. You two guys are really made the push here going back to the 2004.
2004 was the inaugural year, yeah.
So
20 years.
Man, it has
20th season this year, yep.
light years
Yeah.
from then. I remember around that era, I had been working at Englishtown as a PA announcer, the drag strip
no kidding.
there. And obviously the import craze started and came in the late 90s and early 2000s. It was absolutely on fire. And then Drift soon followed that. Was that all kind of a tie-in to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to call the demise of import drag racing, I think actually helped the longevity of drifting for a reason that you might not think. Back in those days, there were a lot of sanctioning bodies that were developing around import drag racing, and they tended to compete against each other in ways that were probably not ultimately healthy for the strength of the series, where you might have an all-star driver that participated in one series, but another series had one big event that he wanted to go to, he or she wanted to go to, and it happened to conflict with the series that they were participating in. And so if you're a fan and you're expecting to see Steph Papadakis and he's not there that weekend, you're missing a key component of the thing that is a good marketing element for your series. And so we've been pretty lucky in that sense. When we started Formula Drift, there was competition in the marketplace, but the drivers have always been of the understanding, given that history, that it's really good and important long-term to support the series that you're in and work at it together to build that foundation. So yeah, we've got to the 20th season. Many people, I think, especially in the early days, thought we would make it a year or two, maybe 5 max. But once we got to the 10 year, and that was a big, awesome, smile on our face, Then all of a sudden it's 15 and 20, and the dynamic has completely changed.
10 years got to feel, and I know with me, with my company, I started one of my companies in '04, and 10 years ago seems like a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Right. And everything that's happened in between, and kind of where you are now, where you were then, what you thought then, what you know now. I mean, and it's every day you're figuring something out every day. And I remember when it started, and I honestly thought, what is this? You know what I mean? And then you get watching it, and you start the competition, and I mean, there's a lot going on there. I mean, it's a great show.
And that's kind of what it's turned into be. Is there's a cultural aspect to it, there's a motorsport aspect to it. In the early days, I think a lot of traditional racing enthusiasts and even sanctioning bodies and companies thought that drifting was antithetical to motorsports because it's not about how fast you get from point A to point B. But once you kind of see the cultural aspects of it, and the most important part, which is modern day motorsports, is trying to get a younger audience to participate, whether it's watching or coming to the events. And what we've seen is that some of the demographic has been aging out for some of the motorsports. And so how do we get new people to be interested in motorsports? Up comes along this drifting thing, and it happens to be all kids 18 to 30 as a primary demographic. So what is it about that sport that is captivating those people to come out, be crazy, go nuts, watch broadcasts? And that's been something that we've really focused a lot of our attention on.
Did you guys, was it a struggle? I mean, it seemed as though maybe it was a gimmick or a novelty at the very beginning. Was it a struggle to get past that point, or was that a good opening aspect for the show?
Yes, that was a struggle. However, you mentioned Jim. One of the things that Jim wanted to do in the very early days was looking at how we would sanction. And so when we first came out of the gate, we developed a sanctioning deal with SCCA because he thought that that would give some legitimacy and some understanding to the general motorsports community that it's not a gimmick or a novelty. Whether or not that actually, strengthened the hearts and minds of people or helped us in the long run, it's hard to say. But I do know that once they got on board, they were, I think, playing a role in helping us structure rules and safety in such a way where the gimmicky aspect of it, of the idea of people doing burnouts, on a track, kind of went to the wayside. And then people actually could see, there's really a lot of talent and skill that's required to do this from a competitive standpoint. And then you just build on that over time.
Yeah, I think that was probably a great call, to be quite honest with you. I don't know. I'd be curious to know how many of your competitors at the time even knew about SCCA. But the fact from the business side of it, I would think that sponsors and people that were looking at you would see, oh, they're associated or sanctioned by SCCA. This is a real deal now.
No, I think that's right. Yes. I mean, I can remember particularly the drivers were a little bit negative Nancy with it because, drifting is kind of an outlaw thing. And, you put some stringent rules to it. You say, you got to have these door bars and you got to run this, this kit, and you got to have this fire extinguisher. For many drifters that were coming from, say, the underground drifting culture, that can be a little jarring at first. However, we had some athletes in the early days that kind of came from traditional motorsports, Reese Millen, Samuel Hubinet, Tanner Faust, that recognize that this is an important aspect of building legitimacy, that you can't have lawlessness in motorsports. There's got to be some structure to it. And nowadays, everybody just takes it for granted. I mean, it's part of the norm of operating a motorsports series that you have that structure. But I can remember in the early days, people are like, why do we have to have this rule? And why do we have to have that rule? But, you have to understand, these are athletes that didn't have any previous motorsports experience.
Right.
They are drifters first. So that's probably the big difference there.
So back in the day when they originally started building these cars, who built them?
Most of the cars were built by those individuals. And, I think drifting has a legacy in Japan. There is a certain way that they built cars in Japan. There are no American drift cars in Japan. But when we brought it here and we kind of started building it out, there was at least a blueprint for, what you needed to have in your drift car to make it perform. But then the domestic makes started getting involved. I mean, in the very first year, we had GM and we also had Dodge. And so this was for the first time American cars getting a drift application to it. So in that sense, they were writing the rules of what it takes to drift an American vehicle versus a Japanese vehicle from the ground up. I had to answer honestly, don't. It will ruin your life.
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach, innovation is our life force.
Welcome back to the Skinny. We have Mr. Ryan Sage, who has joined us here on the set. We're coming to you from the PRI show here 2023 as we wrap things up here for our second season on MAVTV. Great to have you with us, man. Cool to have promoters in here because I think it's so important for the racers, hardcore racers that are out there. They're so entrenched in what they need to do. They want to build a car. They want to go compete, but they don't know the struggles of a promoter and everything that has to come together. There's a lot of spokes in that wheel, man. I have mad respect for you guys, and I often wonder why in the world would you ever want to do that job, but as we heard you talk about bringing SCCA in as a sanctioning body and then having a little bit of pushback from some of the purists, if you will, that didn't want those rules, they need to understand that this is a business for you guys. You guys also have to be protected. And with that sanctioning body comes insurance companies to protect you and the racers. And with insurance companies come rules.
Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story. My mom invites me to, she's now retired, but she was a teacher for about 30 years, and she would invite me to the career day and to talk about what I do. And, I'd make a PowerPoint and, show them all the cool stuff or whatever and da-da-da-da-da. And, invariably I would get the question, how do I get into doing this? How do I get into like being a promoter and doing events? And I had to answer honestly, don't. It will ruin your life.
I'm trying to show you what not to do with your life.
Yeah,
Unless
exactly.
you never want to go home again or talk to somebody else other than on the phone.
And I say that somewhat facetiously because obviously people that are involved in as being a promoter, they have a love for what they're doing that can override
Absolutely.
all the BS that comes with it. But yes, the structure of things, the foundation, the behind the scenes, all of that stuff that really doesn't get seen oftentimes by the athletes and definitely not by the fans is basically what is pushing the sport in whatever direction you're going to, whether it's the insurance, whether it's sanctioning, whether it is deals that you're putting together with tracks. All of those things are part of the nuts and bolts of the operation.
Yeah, and as technology has moved along, there's so many more spokes to the wheel, to use that analogy again, where when you guys go in, do you monitor how many people come into that area? Say that, let's just say you go to Road Atlanta. Do you know how the population changes? And are you able to grab some of that, what do they call that, travel money, like for people that book hotel rooms?
So, yeah, I mean, so I guess maybe the best way to answer that is like, we do understand for a lot of the events what the economic impact is. And there are organizations in the different areas that we go to that you can go and ask for financial support, ask for marketing support. We talked about like in the early days how we were structured. The modern day Formula Drift is a little bit different, actually a lot different than it was at the beginning. So today we self-sanction, today we are our own promoter, and today we are the commercial rights holder. So that's kind of like the FIA, F1, and the television side of things all together. And so the responsibilities are much deeper in breadth, but what it has allowed us to do is that I can take a phone call from CJ and say, hey, do you guys want to do a live broadcast? Boom, yeah, I don't need to ask anybody's permission. CJ and I can get that deal done. You want to go to this particular market? Yes. Okay, we don't have to ask anybody's permission. We can work with the teams to do that and figure out if it's in the best strategic benefit of what we're doing. And along the way, you will find that depending on what markets you go to, there will be people that will want to court you to come to their market. Some of the bigger markets like Southern California, it's a lot more difficult because it's a huge media market. And, you almost have to try to fight your way in to get the best dates, get the best venues and things like that. But some of the smaller markets where it makes a big impact on the local economy, there are ways for you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do in Southern California.
Where would you run in Southern California?
So right now we have 2 events. We have one, which is the weekend prior to the Long Beach Grand Prix on the Long Beach Grand Prix street course. That is at current our biggest event that we have. And then we also run at Irwindale Speedway, and that's our final event of the year.
How many times has it been the final event at Irwindale because it's their last year?
That's hilarious you say that. Like, we've taken such a beating over that because we've promoted events. This is the last one. This is the last one.
It's like the Kiss farewell tour.
Yeah, exactly.
About 10 years in a row.
And, you know, I mean, there is a deeper, like, sad point about that in general, is that some of these smaller market, not always smaller market, short course tracks, they're not doing as great as I wish that they were. And we've seen a lot of the tracks really struggle to be able to keep business going 365. Whereas, you know, the big tracks are doing pretty much okay. They're filling the grandstands. They have a lot of events going on. And so when you have a sport like drifting, we actually appeal more to the smaller market short course tracks, because usually it's going to be 10 to 20,000 seats. It's going to have a venue in which wherever you sit, you can see all the action, which is something that is basically necessary for drifting. Like, if you miss part of the drift or the competition, you're going to miss the story. But at a racetrack, I can sit at turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and it's okay because I'm watching it as it goes by. I can see the leaders happen. I might be listening on the radio. In drifting, if you can't see everything from whatever vantage point you are, you're actually missing out on the idea of it. So, you know, we try to work with tracks that we feel that we can help them continue to be in business for a long period of time. And that means that going to those venues that might not appeal to a traditional racing sanctioning body. Literally within 3 years, I could be in the Formula Drift Championship, whether it's pro spec or pro.
Welcome back to the Skinny. We're here at the PRI show. Inside of the MAVTV booth, we have Ryan Sage sitting right alongside. He is the president of Formula Drift. And as the president, obviously a promoter as well, man of many hats. It is not an easy job. Very, very difficult to pull together all the parts and pieces to put on a big show. Now 20 years deep inside of this sanctioning body, certainly proven that he can get the job done. I want to go back to 2004. You talked about that inaugural year. It happened at Road Atlanta. Did you work personally with Don Panos by chance?
I've met Don. We did not work with him personally. The guy we worked with was a guy named Jeff Lee, who actually I was supposed to meet at the show here this weekend, but he didn't come out. He worked at the track for a long period of time. We knew about Road Atlanta, obviously, from just general motorsports knowledge, but we got a relationship with Road Atlanta and some of the tracks in the first couple of years, because Jim and I had a marketing company where we were going around and doing car shows during event weekends at some of those venues on behalf of Mazda. And so we had established these relationships with tracks. And when we got the drifting opportunity, we came up with the brand. The first tracks that we went back to say, hey, are you interested in having this sport at your track? Were those tracks. It was the Road Atlantas, it was Sonomas, it was Wall Speedway. And so that's kind of how that all started.
Wow, that's pretty. Wall Speedway up in New Jersey. That's pretty cool. So they were comfortable with you as a promoter and bringing business and successful shows to the track. So they're like, yeah, we want shows. So they have a little bit of faith in you. You take the next step forward and start bringing these cars out there. How concerned were you guys for car count whenever you start holding these events? Like your first one, are you like, man, are we going to get 10 cars? Are we going to get 20 cars? And what was that like?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And car count is a big term in motorsports in general. It's so different in drifting. I can kind of explain that a little bit. And just to touch on Road Atlanta, because it was the very first event ever in the history, they actually bit down more on the possibility of this being a big sport than I think even we thought that it could be, because they completely repaved an area for us to be able to drift there. You know, part of the thing with drifting is that the start and finish kind of have to be close to each other because you do 2 laps in a tandem format. So if I start here and I end over here and it takes me 5 minutes to get back to do the second run, that's not really going to be good for programming. But if I start here and I end here, I can turn around and do the second lap and it's going to be okay. And that's what Road Atlanta did for us. But when we started, drifting was in a top 16 competition format. So that meant that really all we had to have was 16 or above. And at that time, I think we probably had, mid-20s or so of drivers that were competing for those 16 spots. So car count wasn't that as much of an issue. Car count has become an issue in the modern day drifting format because it's expanded to a 32 car format from about 2009 on.
And a couple classes too, right?
2 different series. So one is a spec series that runs 4 out of the 8 events that we do, and then the pro series, which is the kind of the main product.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I still go back to the originals that built them. I mean, and now where this has progressed to, I mean, what size are these teams? How many people do they have that travel, work day to day?
Okay, that's honestly one of my favorite questions because tomorrow if I woke up and I wanted to be a professional baseball player, I couldn't do it. If I wanted to even be a mixed martial artist, even if I was a big beast, I couldn't do it. But if I'm working at a shop right now and I am passionate about drifting, literally within 3 years, I could be in the Formula Drift Championship, whether it's pro spec or pro. And I say that because I've seen that happen time and time again. The barrier to entry for drifting is very low relative to other motorsports. And it means that I don't have to come from a family of means or have a big business to be able to afford to do a drifting program, even at the pro level. So to answer your question, there's a huge variance. We've got guys that are running a 3-person team where they're probably spending, tens of thousands of dollars to run their program. And we've got teams that have 15, 20 people that are running on the weekend, and it's probably millions of dollars for their program. And the crazy part about that is that former team can beat this team on any given day because of the nature of drifting. And that just sounds absurd.
I love it. But I love
it's
it.
Great.
That's
It's
David Goliath. I mean, that's awesome.
And the land of opportunity. I mean, it's just beautiful that you have that option. So once again, we have the president of Formula Drift here. We're going to touch base on these cars. We'll go a little bit deeper. Rico brought it up before. Let's learn a little bit about these things. Stay with us.
So that means I'm going in a straight line at 105, and then I just go.
Welcome back to The Skinny. I'm Ken Stout. The big guy sitting alongside me, that is Rico Elmore. We have a full staff here in the middle of the MAVTV booth as we bring you another edition of The Skinny, wrapping up the 2023 season here. Looking forward to 2024 as well on MAVTV. Ryan Sage has joined us here, president of Formula Drift, learning a little bit about the promotion of the promoter's job, maybe I should say, and he's been part of Formula Drift since day one, going back to 2004. And I teased this going to break. We want to learn a little bit more about these cars. There's also been a massive progression in the cars as well as the sport going back to 2004. And we see these things now, man. They're making 1,000 horsepower. They are roasting tires. The level of drivership, if you will, has also just exploded. I mean, the people behind the wheel, I think they've always been good, but now what they're able to do with the cars, courtesy of technology and how they've learned to build the cars, is just unbelievable to watch them. But tell us about the cars. You've mentioned 2 different classes. So can you give us a little bit about the 2 different classes and what it takes?
Sure. So, I mean, they both have very similar foundations, and they come from a philosophy that when we started doing this, we didn't necessarily want to go the route of traditional racing, I guess I'll just say, right? We wanted the cars to be cars that you could go buy off of a lot and modify and compete. So these are all, stock body chassis. The modifications really come in safety apparatus. We have no horsepower limits. There is a tire to weight ratio that is utilized. So if you're, depending on how heavy your car is, depends on the width of your tire, because forward grip is really important in drifting. And if you can run away from the guy, that's going to give you an advantage. But essentially, besides those major components, it's run what you run. And that I think is what has made drifting unique, or FD unique, in the sense that I can look at Vaughn Gittin Jr.'s Mustang, and then I can turn over to the Ford dealership and say, that's that car. And I can take those parts and the fab work that he did, and I can go now produce that car. Now, obviously, that's a lot harder than it sounds, because Vaughn is an incredible team owner, fabricator, and all that kind of stuff. But, these are not cars where, we are putting a body on top of the chassis.
They're not a full tube chassis car constructed on a jig. And
exactly. This is, I need to decide what chassis I want to use, which one has the best balance, marry that up with the best tire, and then put my personal touches on it. But when you look at the car, it's going to look like a Mustang. It's going to look like a Toyota, whatever model that you're bringing to the event.
What's the top speed?
Drifting is not a very heavy top speed type of sport, but it really depends on the run up. So for example, our Salt Lake City event, we get guys that'll do 105 miles per hour on entry. So that means I'm going in a straight line at 105, and then I just go like that. Road Atlanta is very similar, but some of the tracks are lower relative speeds. And we've been very, very lucky over the years that there's going to be wrecks every single event. Nobody ever gets hurt, because usually when you're going sideways, you're not stopping fast. You're spinning out, you're hitting a guy, you're crashing into a wall, you're damaging some stuff. And the wrecks can be pretty spectacular, but because the speeds are relatively slower when you're drifting around a course, the possibility of injury is also lower.
Yeah, I've noticed that what you're saying there as well. But to go back to you, I guess generally speaking, in the world of racing, 105 doesn't sound like much. But when I watch these guys now, guys and gals do what they do, the rate of speed, I think, is much higher than it ever used to be. And to watch the massive car control and the proximity of the car that they're beside is unbelievable. I mean, it's absolute wicked talent between the drivers for sure. But the speed has gotten better, faster every single year, it seems.
Everything is magnified. In the early years, if you went and watched an old show, you would see that for the most part, there would be some general separation between driver A and driver B. Now you can't go through any part of the bracket, whether it's top 32 or the final four, where it's literally inches. And, if you think about human reaction time, quarter of a second to hit a baseball at 90 miles per hour, you can imagine that when you decide to approach a car that's going 75 and you're right in his door, any little perturbation in that car, you're going to have to adjust to. So there's of course a mental and physical aspect to it. There's also a strategy. I need to know what that guy's going to do. I need to know what his tendencies are. What research do I have? What data do I have to show how quickly he's getting through the course? What angle he's carrying? So it has become a completely different sport than it was 20 years ago, because all these factors have magnified. As you said, it's gotten faster, it's gotten quicker, there's more proximity, more angle, more tire smoke. All those things have continued to build over time.
So something that in speed, I was wondering about that. A lot of people go to the race, they want to see speed, they want to see wrecks, but the overall show is amazing. How are they scored? How does it work?
So we run the sport very similar to an NCAA basketball competition. You start off by getting qualified. And so that's a single run that you do. And our current format is based off of essentially 3 criteria: line, angle, and style. And then style has a definition for what it is. That's a maximum of 100 points. You do your lap, you get scored out of 100. Those top 32 scores go into an NCAA style type bracket. 1 versus 32, 2 versus 31, all the way down. And then that is our main competition. So we go from 32 to 16 to 8 to 4 down to the finals.
Interesting point for sure. Something else we'll touch on when we come back. We also want to dive into the judging aspect of this sport. That's always in question and a lot of fun to talk about. Stay with us.
ProSpec might be a place for you to strictly test your driving talent because of the technical constraints that are in place.
The Skinny is brought to you by American Coach. American Coach, innovation is our life force. And Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04.
In 2021, he took over as president of Formula Drift. You're looking at Ryan Sage. He's joined us here on the Skinny. Couldn't be happier to have him with us here as well. You touched on the two classes when we asked you about the cars, and certainly you spoke of the pros. But what's the difference between the pro and the pro spec?
So pro spec has a little bit of a tighter grasp on the things that are required in the car build. So one is you cannot have a greater tire width than 255, and it's a singular supplier for pro spec. And then the other thing is it's a spec ECU from Link Engine Management. So those two components, and there's some technical things that are probably worth a 2-hour conversation of why that's the case. From the ECU to the tire management side of things, it is very, very difficult for you to outspend somebody and have a better car with those constraints in place.
Interesting.
So the idea is to make it so that there's a cost containment element, because with drifting, because it is not about going fast in a straight line or around corners, we have different attributes that we can play into to do the thing that all of motorsports is trying to do, which is how do I contain costs? How do I keep it so that this guy over here isn't outspending everybody and winning every single race? And yes, there will be people that will build better things and that will have more money, but the probability calculus is way different in drifting than it is in other sports.
So quick question for you, is part of the thought process for pro spec allowing them to build something that will fit in pro spec that they could at some point advance into the pro class with? Is that part of the thought process? I mean, do you want them? I'm guessing you would love to see them advance up, or are you happy with them right there? It doesn't matter. You need both.
There are varying opinions on, what pro spec is meant to do. I can tell you from an internal perspective, pro spec is supposed to be its own standalone series. It will invariably be looked at as a stepping stone to pro because it has less rounds and the cars are going to be differently built. But we have guys that have been in pro spec for years and have been able to create a program off of that. I think, the Pro Series is the big shiny object up on the hill. It's where a lot of the funding is. But if you're a guy that doesn't want that and you want to run 4 weekends out of the year, but you want to do competition against some of the best drivers in the world, Pro Spec might be a place for you to strictly test your driving talent because of the technical constraints that are in place. It's a very driver-centric series, whereas Pro is driver centricity balanced with what's the craziest car that I can build with these rules.
So in the pro spec category, would you rate, is it unlimited horsepower again? Or based on the ECU and some of the other constraints there, it kind of limits them?
In a technical sense, it's unlimited horsepower, but when you marry that with a 255, at some point too much horsepower becomes bad.
Okay.
So it's about finding that balance. I mean, most drifting cars, whether they're pro spec or pro, are burning off a set of rears after 2 laps. And so that basically means that tire conservation is a part of the strategy, because if I burn it off too quickly to gain an advantage on run number 1, I may not have the tire to compete in run 2, and that's a requirement of the current rule set. If we were not a judge sport, I'm pretty certain I'd still have hair right now.
Welcome back to the PRI show and the MAVTV booth. You're watching The Skinny. I'm Ken Stout. That is Rico Elmore. Great to be here as we wind up our 2023 season. Looking forward to next year as well. Once again, the home here for The Skinny on MAVTV. Ryan Sage has joined us here. He is the president of Formula Drift, became the president in 2021, worked alongside Jim Law for a number of years as they really got things up and going. 2 segments ago, I teased as we were going to break, I wanted to touch on the judging of this sport. And I think that's always been the big variable. And, you hear positives, you hear negatives about that is part of the sport versus a straight up race, a drag race we'll use as an example. First one to the stripe wins. In your sport, not necessarily the case. So there's a lot of personal aspect to the judging that can give somebody some extra points one way or the other. How do you keep that all contained?
Well, let's just put it this way. If we were not a judge sport, I'm pretty certain I'd still have hair right now. So, but if there is something distinct about drifting that separates it from the rest of motorsports, it is the fact that it is a judge sport. It is a foundational pillar to what differentiates it from other motorsports. And when I hear about the ideas about automating, using computers, scoring systems that use AI or something like that to give a result, I always worry about that, because one of the driving forces, and I'm a fan of tools, of judging tools, whether it's telemetry data or anything like that. One of the things that has driven the sport to where it is the fact that everybody can be a judge in principle. Now, you could be a horrendous judge, watching a live stream or, doing an analysis, not using the rules consistently with how they're written. But the fact that people can debate it afterwards, the fact that they can talk about it, the fact that they can bring nuance into the discussion is not something that's available once the guy has crossed the finish line. You know who the winner is, minus some technical infraction or something like that. And that has been a major driving factor. It's why I believe that second only to NASCAR, our social media and our driver social media sits in that position as second place only to NASCAR. It's because it is a youthful audience. They understand subjectivity. They are participating in snowboarding, skateboarding. It's what they've grown up on. And they fell in love with this motorsport that has this judged element to it. It is the most stressful part of it, but it is also part of it foundationally. I can't imagine it being any other way.
Who's the most loved and who's the most hated out of them?
Judge? Oh gosh. He retired this year. Our judge, Ryan Lantain, Canadian guy, now lives down here. Big drifting guys in automotive. He was probably the best, most well-spoken judge that we had over the longest tenure. And he was so well-liked. He became the #1 judge in the world. He was being scouted, and we wanted him. We allowed him to be scouted by other bodies across the world, the FIA. He was just being asked to do everything. He was working 35 weekends a year doing drifting events. He was a beloved figure in the early days. Once we got past COVID and we saw this huge explosion in audience, I think it went in another direction. He was being much more scrutinized, and it's very, very difficult. A lot of these guys they're not public figures. They don't want to be public figures, but when they're getting tagged, 10,000 times about some call that they made on their social media, it can get a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I would be concerned as the judges become more of a part of the series now, very, very involved, and they build those relationships with those drivers, and not to call out the integrity of the judge, but I'd be concerned with favorites, or expectations, maybe is a better way to put it, where that judge is expecting this guy that has been so good in so many previous events to be good here again, almost leaning that way before they start against somebody that might be an underdog. That would be my concern, that ability to almost sway it that way from the very beginning and then call it fair.
That's it. That's everything, right? You have to be able to, when you're hiring a judge, understand if they're the kind of person that can leave natural biases at the door. If they're the kind of person that can sit down and with a very rigid mindset, do an analysis on a run, turn over to you and say, given this set of rules, this is the most consistent outcome, and that there will be some agreement to that. What we see a lot of is that, as the sport has gotten more competitive and as the runs have gotten closer, it has become more difficult for the judges to have universal agreement on everything. You might get a run that's driver A, driver B, one more time, where it's split across the board because one guy was edging it out for this guy, the other guy was edging it out for this guy, and this guy was just like, no, it's too close to call, I want one more time. Now that looks absurd. One for this one for that one, and one more time. But when you look at it in detail, you understand how that can take place. And that's also, I think, kind of what you want in judges, is not for them to agree on everything all the time across the board, but that they can apply the rule set consistently.
Want to get the skinny on other guests in different types of motorsports? Check out our YouTube page and get the skinny. The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And American Coach. American Coach, Innovation is our life force.
Welcome back to the Skinny. We have Ryan Sage, president of Formula Drift, who's been on with us here this time, and great to have him out here. A great perspective on Formula Drift. It's a great competitive sport. If you've not watched it, I would urge you to do so. If you love it whenever you're watching a race and the last two cars are side by side right to the stripe, well, these guys start off that way and end that way, and it's super cool. The talent is second to none. The cars are second to none. They scream at full song. They are a beautiful thing to listen to. I mentioned to you while we were at commercial break that I've had the opportunity of watching them at Long Beach a number of times as we were out there competing in a different series, and always exciting, and the way those cars roll smoke off and the level of competition between the two drivers now and how close they are to each other. And by far and away, more times than not, don't touch each other and don't crash. Of course, it's going to happen. We touched on judging. Before we go into what 2024 looks like, here's one last question about the judging of it. I'm curious how the judges can determine, and you mentioned tools, by the way, for judging, which I thought was a very, very good term. I'm curious how a judge can tell if a driver that's at speed is hung up, either had to back out of it maybe a little bit because they thought they were going to make a mistake. Maybe they purposely did it because the car behind is getting close and they want to jam them. How do they understand what's going on out there to the point that they can judge if that guy did it right and got beat, or if he did it wrong and got away with it?
There might be some leftover food bits on this chair here, but I can't see it because my eyes are not at that level of granularity. But I could get something that could expose that, and you and I could have a discussion about what was left here. That's analogous to what goes on in the cars at a very micro level. There are things that you can see with your naked eyes that you can make a judgment on. There are things that are happening that are relevant to that you cannot see, and that requires the advent of bringing in some tools that will show in a very minute detail whether you are accelerating, decelerating, or maintaining speed, whether you are braking with your handbrake, with your foot brake, what angle you are moving the car at, how quickly you're going through the course, what time is elapsing. And those kind of things are the tools that I'm talking about, where when you are at such close proximity to another driver and any little perturbation might cause a collision, some of these things you may not be able to see because I would lift real quick, but if my suspension's set up in a certain way where it doesn't dip, you might have a little bit of a deceleration, but it's going to be very hard for the judge to see. Or is it that you are slowing down or I'm speeding up in a collision? How do we determine that? Well, really, that's where the data comes into play. So we run telemetry on all the cars. We've got some physical lights that tell a physical story about deceleration on the cars as well. And those are the things that I think that are needed in the modern day drifting, because it is just way too difficult, particularly with the smoke, right? And if you're trying to find the chase car buried in the smoke, what's he doing? What's going on here? That you need to have some of that insight along with really great television production to be able to tell that physical story.
Yeah, it's got to be a huge task to overcome every single event, but I always admire everybody that's in the midst of that, and the second driver who's buried in the smoke, trying not to hit the guy in front of him but stay close.
Burnout.
Talk about driving blind, man. It's crazy. So I know we touched on it right off the very start of the show here, but 2024, will you be back on MAVTV, and what's it look like for you guys?
Yeah, we will. We're definitely looking forward to it. It's going to be the same 8 rounds with generally the same dates. We are at kind of the tail end of some of our multi-year contracts for some of our venues. Probably 2024 is going to be a preparatory year for the next 5-year flight that we're looking at in terms of, are we going to expand? What markets are we going to go to? What tracks are available? Which ones do we feel like are going to be to be able to raise the profile of the series? That's something that now that we've gotten 20 years done, we have to look forward to the next 20 years. And what does that look like, particularly for my tenure as being involved in the sport? Is, I'm not going to be around forever. I'm still relatively young, but I've been doing this for 20 years. And, at some point, I want to get it to where I've given everything to it that I can contribute, and I can do no more, and hand that off to somebody that can take it on for the next 20 years or whatever it may be. But for the time being right now, looking at the next 5 years or so, it's really going to determine, whether or not we're going to stay an 8-round championship, a 10-round championship, if we're going to expand internationally, what new venues and markets are we going to go to. And so it's going to be a really exciting time.
Awesome stuff, man. Congratulations, by the way, on all the success from day one. It's super cool to talk to somebody that's been in it and pushed it forward. Obviously, you're extremely good at what you do, so don't worry about being president of this thing. You've done a wonderful job, and great that you took a little bit of time to spend with us as well.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
For the fans at home, hopefully you know a little bit more of the skinny of what it takes to go Formula Drift racing, and if you get a chance, put it on the bucket list because you'll want to watch what this guy does.